The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way in which we do business in this country. What is the effect that it will have on workers going forward? Today on this May Day, I have with me the President of the National Union of Public Workers, Mr. Akani McDowall. Hi, Mr. McDowall.
Hi, Kobie. Morning to you. I want to thank you for having me this morning. And of course, I want to say to Barbados, Happy May Day.
Thank you, sir. The first thing that I will ask you is, the Prime Minister would have announced a stimulus package that speaks to how we will reopen the economy. Unlike other regions in the Caribbean who have asked public servants to either be laid off or to take public cuts, none of that was announced. And I know she said she would have engaged the social partners, which the union is a part of. Does the union count this as a victory?
Well, if you listen to the Prime Minister's speech specifically, she would have made mention of a subcommittee of the social partnership to discuss the future of the public service. So I believe that at some point we are going to have a discussion about the future of the public service as it relates to the level of jobs that exist within the public service and also the salaries that are presently within the public service. So I don't want to give the public the wrong impression that this discussion will never happen. It would be foolhardy of us to even believe that we will not have this discussion, at least at the national level. And the Prime Minister sort of indicated within her speech that this subcommittee is going to have those kinds of discussions. So I'm looking forward to having those kinds of discussions. Of course, the union is going to have a strategy for ensuring that the levels of employment are maintained within the public service and also that the salaries of public servants are maintained. So we are going to have our strategy. I anticipate that this discussion should happen relatively soon because there are a number of things that are happening within the private sector, and so far the public sector has not been affected. So I suspect that we are going to have a very serious discussion on the public service very, very soon. So I look forward to that discussion, and the union is ready. We are capable, we have the capacity within our leadership to have that serious discussion when that time comes.
And given this whole COVID-19 pandemic, what was the general feedback from your membership as it relates to going forward long term, or even many people would have been asked to work from home? What are some of the feedback that would have been provided from your membership as it relates to working from home or as it relates to job security going forward?
So this pandemic has encouraged many of us to use technology more and more. If you look at this discussion that we are having now, Kobie, something like this in the past would not have happened before. And, it is all because of the pandemic. So the pandemic has some negative sides to it, and it also has some benefits. And I think that this is one of the benefits of the pandemic. It has forced a lot of public servants to work from at home. Now, the union previously at the social partnership meetings would have put forward the idea of public servants working from at home. It was something that we always felt very passionate about, and we still do, because we understand that it is easy for someone to go to work at 8:15 and leave work at 4:30 and be counted as productive, but that person may not be necessarily doing any, and these may not be members of the union, obviously, but that person may not be as productive as they can be if they were at home without having to think about traveling to work, without having to think about dropping off their kids, those kinds of things. So we were always in favor of a work-life balance, and flexible working arrangements were one of those things that we encouraged. Now, that discussion has, of course, gone beyond working from at home and encompasses now an all broader discussion about flexible working arrangements, which we are having with the Ministry of Public Service. So we're now talking about compressed work weeks. We're now talking about staggered hours. We're now talking about shortened weeks. Those kind of things are all included in flexible working arrangements. But working from at home has definitely been something that the union has been encouraging. It is something that we will continue to encourage because we believe in work-life balance. It allows our public servants to focus on tasks rather than time. I find that if for a public servant, and I really didn't want to say it previously, that is why I was sort of hedging, but we judge our public servants based on when they come to work at 8:15 and when they leave work at 4:30, which is quite unfortunate. It doesn't mean that someone who comes to work at 8:15 is as productive as they can be. You know, I tend to believe that we need to focus on tasks rather than time. The focus going forward in the future for work and for public servants has to be on task rather than time.
And what, if I'm getting correctly from what you're saying, the conversation about flexible working hours and all that encompasses would have been a conversation that the union would have been having before COVID-19, and the pandemic has just kind of pushed that straight up to the fore. So was there any like pushback to that before, or were the conversations generally going in that direction? And where do you see a particular timeline now to an implementation of a new public sector strategy as it relates to how public servants work shortly?
You're absolutely correct. It was a discussion that was happening before the pandemic, but I think that this pandemic has sort of pushed it to the fore. And there was some apprehension from the powers that be because, of course, they felt as though public servants were not going to be as productive as they could be if they were working from at home. And some also felt that the necessary systems needed to be in place in order for public servants to work from at home. But all of that has changed because of this pandemic. We are now able to work from at home. We are now able to produce much more than we were, some of us much more than we were when we were physically in the workspace. And I don't know about you, but I find myself working much harder at home than I was when I was physically at work. I mean, I'm on Zoom every day. I have to submit my projects every day. So I tend to work harder while I'm at home because there aren't as many time restrictions and interruptions as there would be if you are in a physical workspace. So there were those concerns before, but I think this pandemic has softened the management's position, and therefore we are now having that discussion with the Ministry of Public Service. I believe that we should be able to conclude that discussion relatively shortly. If you do remember within the Prime Minister's speech as well, she would have mentioned the flexible working arrangements that are being discussed with the Ministry of Public Service, and she herself said that she would hope that these discussions be concluded in a very short time.
Based on the COVID-19 pandemic, no, the country would have been shut down for almost five odd weeks. That would have in itself created problems on the NAS, that would have created problems on unemployment. What has been, and some people would have been temporarily laid off. Has your union recorded a significant amount of membership being put in a vulnerable position as a result of COVID-19, and how have you been able to help those persons who may have been put in a vulnerable position because of the pandemic?
Right. So I agree with you that the tourism sector has been significantly impacted, and for most of us who understand the importance of the tourism sector, we rely heavily on the tourism sector to be able to fund public services. So the impact that COVID-19 has had on the public service has not been significant so far, and I would have mentioned that previously, but I know that it has been significant within the private sector. And for us, we are hoping that we have that discussion with government, as I mentioned previously, as soon as possible. We do have a strategy for the maintaining of employment within the public service and also salaries within the public service. So we hope that we can put forward our plans for the public service, and we hope that they are accepted by the government so that it can reduce the impact of the economic environment on the public service. But so far we have been lucky, knock on wood, knock on wood. So far we have been lucky to say that the public service has not been impacted. But again, we will have that discussion with the government.
And finally, Mr. McDowell, the pandemic, as we said earlier, and we've been saying throughout the interview, has changed the way in which we work. Where does the union idealistically want to see the government go as it relates to the future of workers in this country and the future of industrial relations coming out of this pandemic? Because you would have seen almost a different change or a different attitude as it relates to how we treat the workers during this pandemic. Where would the union like to see this? Would the union like to see this continue, or where would the union like to see the future of the workforce, especially in the public sector, go post this pandemic as we reopen the country?
I think the union has some general things that we would like to see implemented, and those things include appointments. We would like to see those safety and health issues within the public service addressed. Those are the general things that we would like to have addressed coming out of this pandemic. But for the broader discussion about the trade union movement, I think the union has to move beyond collective bargaining and go into the establishing of businesses. So things like buying clubs, things like gas stations, supermarkets. We have to be able to service our members when the private sector is unable to serve them. And that is the future of the trade union movement. We need to develop within our movement a business model that is able to support our members in case they are impacted by any other pandemic or any other crisis that there may be. So we have to think forwardly and therefore put those systems in place that will mitigate against the impact of any crises going forward.
And just to know, and just finally, Mr. McDowell, is there anything that you would like to say to the workers now on this May Day?
Of course, I would want to wish them again happy and wonderful May Day. It is unfortunate that we are not able to celebrate our May Day in the usual form where we would march from one place to the other. But I want to let you know that even though we are separated, we are in this together. So the concept of solidarity is still there. And we will continue to ensure that we represent you, our members. We want to wish your family well in this pandemic as the time goes, because I understand that some of you will be at home with your family and you may not be able to do what you necessarily do on May Day. So we want to wish you and your family well. We also want to wish all of those frontline workers, those essential workers who are taking the brunt of the sacrifice for us to ensure that each of us are safe. We want to wish them a happy and wonderful May Day. We are here for you and we thank you for being here for us.